Straight ahead on Law and Crime Daily. A Colorado husband accused of murder allegedly threatened to shoot his wife's lover before she disappeared. Why did Barry Morphew take 5 trips to the trash the same day Suzanne Morphew was reported missing? And a flute repair shop owner turns to a life of crime.
You don't sell someone else's flute and pocket that money.
The woman's punishment for stealing from her customers. Plus,
talking to the jury makes me nervous.
Robert Durst testifies in his murder trial. The real estate heir questioned about the mysterious disappearance of his first wife.
Did you intend to hurt Kathy?
No.
Law and Crime Daily covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law and Crime Daily. I'm Brian Buckmeyer along with Terry Austin. We begin with a strange story out of Ohio where a once reputable flute repair technician turned thief and scam artist. Law and Crime's Anjanette Levy is here with the story of Pat North and her victims.
Brian, I started covering stories about Pat North back in 2019. As I did more stories, more victims came forward, and that in part led to her being charged with stealing from her customers, many of whom she had known for decades.
There is something wrong here. There is something wrong with the way this individual processes the world, thinks about the world.
Harsh words from the prosecutor for Pat North, a woman who repaired flutes for decades, but now admits pawning many of them for cash. Victims from across the country wrote to the judge. Chris Hawk was a longtime customer and found her flute, similar to this one, in a pawn shop.
I believe with all my heart that Pat North knew that what she did was illegal and unethical. I mean, you don't sell someone else's flute and pocket that money.
North said she took the flutes to pawn shops for safekeeping and blamed her poor health for her situation.
I could not keep up with the interest payments on the deposit loans. It never occurred to me that this would happen.
But a former employee said this had been going on well before any illnesses.
She did it to get the repair work, knowing that she could not meet the deadlines. She immediately charged the credit cards, whether or not she would fix it that week, that month, or even that year.
And North's former partner spoke of giving her money for years.
I was in a 38-year plus year relationship with Pat, which is characterized by a history of bullying and gaslighting. And I can't tell you the amount of deceit and betrayal I feel.
I'm here in regards to some musical instruments that were sent to you.
A customer from California hired a private investigator to track down her instruments.
I continued my investigation and located 8 other victims that had been defrauded by Ms. North and re-presented my case.
After more customers came forward, prosecutors filed charges, leading to her sentencing on a felony count.
There are victims whose lives have been destroyed because of this defendant.
The judge ordered Pat North to spend 5 years on community control, which is also known as probation. She also has to get a full-time job and pay back about $90,000 to many of her customers. She was also ordered to get a mental health evaluation followed by mental health treatment. Brian?
Thanks, Anjanette. Joining us today is retired detective and SWAT member Lisa Lockwood and Terry Austin. Lisa, crazy story, but what about the victims? If she pawned off a person's flute and someone bought it, can the police get that flute back to the right person?
It's not necessarily easy to do that if records were not kept. A lot of times across the nation in pawn shops, there are regulations that require the seller to actually give their driver's license information to the pawn shop, and then they keep records of that. There are no records of the buyers per se. And that's if they are doing what they're supposed to legally. A lot of times pawn shops don't even get that information and end up selling it on the side. So it's not an easy feat. The private investigator took it a step further than police did in this particular case and was able to put the case together to show that there were 8 other victims. And in some cases, they were able to get a few of those flutes back.
Absolutely. A lot of digging into this story led us to this point. Speaking of digging in, Terry, Anjanette won't say it, so I guess you and I will. Anjanette's the one who didn't just report on this, but her reporting led to more people coming forward and led to an indictment here. We may not be here but for Anjanette. So your reaction to seeing how the story started and now ended?
You know what, Brian? I have always said that we are very lucky to have Anjanette as a correspondent for Law and Crime. This is not the first time she's investigated something and stuck to the story to make sure that she gets to the end and bring it to the light. And this case in particular, it took some persistent investigation to get down to the bottom of what exactly occurred. This is a very personal crime when you have an individual that you've entrusted with your music and with your instrument, and you've known this individual for so many years. So I think kudos to Anjanette, kudos to the investigators, and I'm glad we finally got to the bottom of this and that there was some justice for the victims of this crime.
Couldn't agree more, Terry. Lucky, honored, proud. Anjanette, let's go back to you now. What was Pat North doing with all this money?
Well, Brian and Terry, first of all, you are very kind and very generous, so thank you for all of your kind words. But really, what she was doing with the money is still the $64 million question. Nobody knows. And, you know, the police spent a lot of time going through her banking records. They went through all of her financial records at the Flute repair shop where she was operating. So nobody really knows what was going on. A lot of people think she was just a really bad businesswoman, but she was putting people off for months and months, and in some cases years, and giving them their instruments back or their money. And it was very rare that she did either.
Well, here's hoping that that restitution or the flutes at the very least get back to the original owners. Thank you, everyone. Turning now to more top legal news, former reality TV star Josh Duggar wants more information about officers involved in his arrest on child porn charges. Duggar was part of the show 19 Kids and Counting on TLC. He's asking a federal judge to order prosecutors to turn over information about some of the officers who arrested him and downloaded files from his laptop. Federal prosecutors call it a fishing expedition and say the information is non-existent or immaterial to the defense. Duggar has pled not guilty. His trial is scheduled for November. And in New York, the jury has been selected for the trial of R&B singer R. Kelly. Kelly was arrested in July 2019 on federal charges of sexual assault, human trafficking, and child pornography. 7 men and 5 women will deliberate R. Kelly's fate. Their identities are anonymous, but one of the men reportedly has a friend in Bill Cosby's family, and another mistook R. Kelly for the cartoonist R. Crumb. Opening statements are set to begin next Wednesday, nearly 2 years after his arrest. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, new evidence revealed in the case of Suzanne Morphew's disappearance. But first, Robert Durst is back on the stand. The real estate heir's continued direct examination as he denies killing his best friend. The questions now turning to the disappearance of his wife, next. Welcome back. Robert Durst is back on the stand for a second day, pleading his case that he didn't murder his best friend nor his first wife. Durst is on trial for the December 2000 murder of his best friend, Susan Berman. But prosecutors also accuse the real estate heir of murdering his first wife, Kathy, in 1982. Kathy's body was never found, and Durst is not charged in her case. On the stand, Durst says he told Kathy he never wanted to have children and asked her to get an abortion when she became pregnant.
Well, about a year, she woke up one morning and she had what she knew was morning sickness because she had watched her 3 big sisters go through it.
Was there a big argument about it, or was it?
No, there was no big argument about it. I took the train to the city and I got a call from Kathy and she said, "Bobby, I want to have this baby." And I said, "I do not want to have a baby." And she said, "Okay, I'll go along with that." She said she'd looked into places where she could get it done, and there was a little clinic right in downtown Cortona, and she wanted me to come home and bring her to the clinic.
Did you do that?
I did that.
Durst says Kathy's friends encouraged her to use drugs, apparently throwing coke and veggie parties. He says around that time in 1981, he learned Kathy had retained her own lawyer.
This is a matrimonial lawyer. Do you want a divorce? No, she does not want a divorce. Have you met somebody? No, I have not met somebody.
Was it a mystery to you as to why she has this matrimonial lawyer?
At some point, I decided that I needed to have a matrimonial lawyer if Kathy had a matrimonial lawyer, even though I had no idea what it was that was a problem.
Did you want a divorce?
No,
Had you even thought about a divorce?
never thought about a divorce, never thought about problems in my marriage. I was happy with my marriage.
But when did you learn that she had a romantic affair with another man? When?
I think the first time I came to accept that she had had an affair was in October of 1981.
Did you have other affairs? That is, with other women?
That's when I started.
Let's bring back retired detective and SWAT member Lisa Lockwood and Terry Austin. Terry, why is this testimony about Durst's relationship with Kathy so important?
You know, they spent a lot of time talking about the relationship with Kathy. I think they're trying to establish a couple of things. First and foremost is the fact that Durst is not mean and cold, and he had a good relationship with his wife, Kathy. He talked about how both of them agreed they didn't want to have children, how he supported her throughout her application for medical school. He contributed mostly to the joint account. He even talked about a month together that they spent in Greece. So they're trying to establish he had no reason to kill her. The other issue is the drug use. I think there's a bit of blaming the victim here, the fact that she had an affair. So maybe she just left on her own. Ultimately, Brian, I think they're trying to show he didn't kill Kathy, so why would he kill Susan Berman?
Exactly, Lisa. A few people have commented on Durst's, let's say, charisma when he testifies. As a retired detective, I'm assuming you see through that all. So what do you see when Durst testifies?
So think about how many times he's been interviewed. We've got hours and hours of footage from the prosecution, from past cases, from Morris Black, from him testifying, from the movie The Jinx. From All Good Things. He loves to talk, no doubt about it. But when I look at it, I don't see it as charisma. I see it as a villainous character similar to Lost in Space, Dr. Smith, somebody who is manipulative. And I'm grateful that all of that did come out in the movies and the jury was able to see the part of him, including the domestic violence against Kathy that was proven, and then also the abortion. And in his mind, it wasn't forced, it was their decision.
Absolutely. Thank you both. Lisa Lockwood, seeing through it all. Sorry. Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, updates on the disappearance of Suzanne Morphew, how multiple trips to a garbage could be incriminating to her husband. Plus, the family of a man convicted of murdering a sheriff's deputy asked the jury for mercy. Does Stephen Wiggins deserve the death penalty for lighting a deputy's body on fire? Welcome back. Text messages between a missing Colorado woman and her husband, who's charged with her murder, reveal their marriage was on the rocks. Suzanne Morphew texted her husband saying she was done with their marriage. 4 days later, she disappeared. A hearing is underway to see whether there's enough evidence for Barry Morphew to stand trial. Prosecutors revealed Suzanne and another man were having an affair at the time she disappeared. Her body has never been found. An FBI agent testified Barry took 5 trips to get rid of garbage and stayed in a hotel the day Suzanne went missing. He claims he was working on a construction job, even though nobody's allowed to work on a Sunday in the city of Bloomfield, Colorado. Back with us is retired detective and SWAT member Lisa Lockwood and co-host Terry Austin. Terry, 5 trash runs the day Suzanne Morphew's disappearance, but her body was never found. So, is this just really odd or is it criminal?
Well, it is really odd, Brian, but it could be criminal if there's other incriminating evidence. And we know already from this preliminary hearing that there is some incriminating evidence. We know their phone records are showing that they may have been arguing and fighting in the house, running around after Suzanne. Obviously, there's a motive here. We know that Barry actually threatened Suzanne's boyfriend with, mutilating him. or at least saying he would do that. So I think there's other evidence here, and I think it could lead to moving this case on to a full-blown trial.
Of course, and that's exactly what the judge is trying to measure here, the volume as well as the quality of the evidence. Lisa, how do you think the investigation into Morphew went based on what you've heard so far?
It's really challenging, Brian, when you don't have a body, no question about it. And we had this case, it's reminiscent of Jennifer Dulos and Fotis Dulos, who ended up killing himself before there was any chance of finding the body or finding out if he was guilty. But we do know that there was strife in the marriage. In both cases, that draws a parallel. Somebody who was threatening to leave somebody else and somebody who didn't want to let go of that individual. So this is a very similar case, but I do believe they did a great job in the forensic of telephones, records, and actually getting video footage of him doing those 5 separate garbage dumps in that case. And it was the same thing with Jennifer and Fotis Dulos.
Yeah, and also that whole Dr. Jekyll and Hyde situation where they were talking about men who have almost like split personalities when it comes to dealing with their wives. There's another similarity. Thank you both. When we come back inside the Tennessee courtroom where a man convicted of shooting and killing a deputy is asking a jury to spare him from the death penalty. The testimony after the break. Welcome back. A Tennessee jury is continuing to hear evidence in the penalty phase for a man convicted of killing a cop, now facing either life in prison or the death penalty. Stephen Wiggins was found guilty of fatally shooting Dickinson Sergeant Daniel Baker and lighting Baker's body on fire. Wiggins stole Baker's patrol vehicle, pretended to be Baker over the radio, and said he shot Baker point blank because, quote, "It's like a dog. You don't let it suffer." Defense attorneys say Wiggins has brain damage from being beaten as a young child, which doesn't excuse his actions, but should be considered as a possible reason to vote against execution.
Mr. Wiggins suffers from a neurocognitive disorder, brain damage. Okay. Likely he was born this way, and it's resulted in seizures, hallucinations, reduced ability to read social cues, irritability, impulsivity, and emotional dysregulation. Kind of in a nutshell, those are the ways in which his various brain areas have impacted him. While brain damage is not curable, symptoms like this are treatable. He is being treated with medications that he was not taking on the street because he couldn't afford it, as well as he's in a structured environment, and he's done very well. And so it's showing, in fact, that he can have a good response with medication and being in a structured environment. And so there is treatment available, there's good treatment available, and he's responding to it.
Wiggins declined to take the stand in his own defense, but the defense did call his mother and brother to talk about abuse Wiggins suffered at the hands of his father, including being beat with a rotary phone.
Like most other things, it was an object for him to use to hit us. If he was incredibly angry at the time, he could hit Stephen anywhere, but every day, all day, he would hit Stephen in the head.
And would he just pop him in the head, or would he hit him with enough, with some force?
It varied. Sometimes it was just a pop, and sometimes it was a full force.
I remembered him dragging me by my hair all the way out of the house, across the porch, and down the steps, pregnant with Stephen.
As the boys got older, did Scott's physical abuse of them increase?
I don't know if his mental problems got worse or if he just began to enjoy it more. It just seemed to get worse and worse and worse, to the point that anything was a weapon. There was weapons, knives. He's held guns to our head.
Lisa, the last person executed in Tennessee was in 2018, and he got the electric chair not after a triple murder, but after he killed another person in jail. So do you think a death sentence may be too hard for the prosecution to get in this state?
I'm not so sure in this particular case because it's going to be based on who makes up the jury. And because it needs to be unanimous, you're going to be looking at people's various personal experiences that they use as a reference, whether it be religious, they don't believe in the death penalty, or they have a family member who has a mental disorder, or they themselves were abused in some capacity. Will they actually garner that sympathy based on that situation? Just as a mother said that the father had mental illness, potentially he does, and he has brain damage. So is he ever going to be a citizen that can stand up in society at any point to have parole? So, I mean, I think that's the entire case that the jury will ultimately decide on.
Absolutely. Terry, do you think Wiggins made the right decision not testifying in the penalty phase?
No doubt about it, Brian. That was the right decision. There were several issues that witnesses established on his behalf. They put classmates on the stand. All the classmates talked about the fact that he had trouble making friends, he was a loner, he didn't dress well, he smelled a little different from the other students, but the main thing is he was bullied and he was mistreated throughout his school life. So I think they've already established much of what they needed through the medical testimony and through these classmates. And so for Wiggins to get up on the stand, I think would only subject him to cross-examination. And I think the jury is going to look at him in a different way if he actually testified. They're either going to think he's acting or, you know, I don't think they're going to see sympathy from him. So this was the right decision not to testify, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would tend to agree as well. All of those witnesses you're talking about can provide the information that he probably would have given anyways. Lisa, Terry, thank you very much for today. And thank you for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.